Right, JJ? Very good. When we have functions that look like this, where you don't just have two things happening, such as amplitude and period, but you have four things happening, this is how we identify what to do. The amplitude is still the absolute value of A. The period is 2 pi divided by B. Does anybody want to guess what the vertical shift is? It's just D. If you remember from when we were doing, kind of translations first semester, we said if it's on the outside, it's vertical. So you can see the plus D is on the outside, that affects it vertically, which means the inside is horizontal. It's not C. You got to solve for where Bx minus C is equal to 0. And whatever you come up with for the solution there, that's the horizontal shift. That's the horizontal shift. Okay? So, we're going to practice graphing a few of these. When you consider graphing these, always start with the vertical shift. When you have a vertical shift, draw a horizontal line for your new axis. So your previous functions always kind of moved around the x-axis. These are not going to move around the x-axis. These are going to move around something different. For example, if you look at this one, what number is being added onto the end? So therefore, the vertical shift is 2. If the vertical shift is 2, I'm going to go up 2 units. And that's what the graph is going to kind of, we say oscillating. It's going to oscillate back and forth on 2. Looking at this graph, can you tell me from our work the past couple days what the amplitude is? The amplitude is 3. So here's the important part. If the amplitude is 3, what's the highest that the graph is going to go now? 5. It's going to go 3 units above its shift. What's the lowest spot the graph is going to go? -1. So notice, from the shift, it goes up 3 and down 3. From the shift, it goes up 3 and down 3. Got that? So the vertical part of the graph is fine now. Now what we're going to do is deal with the horizontal part. We deal with the period. For the period, we do 2 pi divided by the number in front of x. What are you going to get? 2 pi. Mark off 2 pi, pi over 2, 3 pi over 2. Okay, looks like everybody's good to go. Last thing I try to identify is the horizontal shift. And for the horizontal shift, we just look at what's on the inside x and set it equal to 0. So as I set this equal to 0, I just get 0. So there is no horizontal shift. So in this case, we'll set x minus pi over 4 equal to 0. And when we'll solve, we get pi over 4. So there is a horizontal shift there. So whenever you're taking the sine of or the cosine of, that's what you set equal to 0 and solve to see if there is in fact a shift. So in this case, we get none. So you tell me, cosine, does it start at the top, bottom, or middle in this situation? What do you think? Starts at the top. So I start up at 5. Then it started, instead of crossing over the x-axis, it crosses over 2. Then it goes to the bottom, back up, and to the top. And that's our graph. It's a wave. If you notice, if I were to take this graph and drag it down, that's what it would have looked like, except we had the +2, didn't we? The +2 took the graph and just moved it up there. What do you think? All right. So the first thing we did is we did a vertical shift. We drew a horizontal line. Then for the amplitude, what you did is you took the vertical shift plus or minus the amplitude to mark off the max and min. That gave us the vertical structure of the graph. Then the period, we did 2 pi divided by b, and we divide into 4 parts. That's kind of our setup. We're going to talk about the horizontal shift. The last one did not have a horizontal shift. The next one does. And that's where it gets a little complicated for people. So let's look at this guy. Is there a vertical shift here? Is there a plus or minus something on the outside? Nope. So there's no vertical shift. So we're going to be right on the x-axis. Makes this one a little bit easier. The amplitude, 1. So I can mark off +1 and -1. So I have my max and my min. I'm ready to go. The period is going to be 2 pi divided by what? What's the number in front of x? 1, and we just get 2 pi. So I won't feel bad if you guys answer, any different way, but do you guys have that much fun in all of your classes? Or is it just when we end up with my class, we end up with like pi over 2 and stuff that it becomes very fun? I appreciate the enthusiasm. Because believe it or not, I know this is going to sound difficult to believe, some people don't like math. I know. It's stuff. Yeah. It's like, oh, Zelly. Some people, you can't wait till they graduate. Okay, so. So this one, this is where you need to pause. The first 3 are generally really easy, but at that point, pause and draw what we call a ghost graph. For the record, I don't believe in ghosts. The horizontal shift is very difficult for people to deal with generally. And so before I do the horizontal shift, I'm going to sketch a ghost graph with just what I have right now. Where does sine start? starts in the middle. Is this one going to start by going up or down? And I'm going to just draw a dashed graph. I'm not going to draw a solid graph. I'm going to draw a dashed graph. And I call that a ghost graph. Why? Because it's not the actual graph. It's just going to help me make the new graph. In order to determine the new graph, I have to determine the horizontal shift. The horizontal shift you'll find by taking x minus pi over 4 and setting it equal to 0. How do we solve x minus pi over 4 equals 0? X is pi over 4. That's the horizontal shift. Can somebody tell me how much is pi over 4? Is that one whole tick mark? Is that more than one whole tick mark? Is that less than a tick mark? It's half of a tick mark, right? So to show the actual graph, I'm going to take these points and move them each a half of a tick mark to the right. If it's negative, very good, JJ. If it's negative, you do move to the left. Good job. When we draw it, hopefully your new graph looks like an exact replica of the dashed one before it, just shifted to the right, pi over 4 units. If I grab this and drag it, you can tell that is in fact what I get. Okay, here we go. We're going to do these first two together. Who can tell me what the vertical shift is? Vertical shift is 1. What is the amplitude? 2. So if the vertical shift is 1 and the amplitude is 2, what's the highest the graph is going to go? 3. So we go 1, 2, 3. 3 is the highest the graph will go. What's the lowest the graph will go if... Now you can see if the shift is 1 and the amplitude is 2, it's going to go up to 3 and down to -1. So I now have the vertical structure of my graph taken care of. I'm going to identify the period. I take 2 pi and divide it by the number in front of x. 2 pi divided by, I get 2 pi. True or false? I have a horizontal shift. The horizontal shift is pi over 4. Before I do pi over 4, I'm going to make a ghost graph. Where do I start? Max, min, or middle? Middle. Do I go up or down? Up, middle, down, up. That's my ghost graph. How much is pi over 4? 1 tick mark, less than 1 tick mark, half of a tick mark. I take all these points and move them 1 tick mark to the right. Or I'm sorry, half of a tick mark to the right. left then. If you came up with a, oh, I'm sorry, for the ones over here, you continue to move to the right. If this thing came up negative, then you would move everything to the left. Last one. This one's a good test. If you can do this one, then you are fine. This one's a challenging problem. Vertical shift. -2. So I go down 2. What is the amplitude? 2. So if I go down 2 and the amplitude is 2, what's the lowest spot I'll get to? -4. I'm going down 2. Very good. Highest I get to is 0. Lowest I get to is -4. Yes. Please don't do that. Sometimes people want to change this so this axis is not 0. And it's very difficult to understand and grade when I go through that process. So please make sure that this is 0, 0. Period. 2 pi over 3. That sounds like that could be difficult to divide up. Two pi over 3, -2 pi over 3. So when you're struggling to divide things by 2, instead of dividing by 2, try multiplying by a half. If you take 2 pi over 3 and multiply by a half, what are you going to get? What happens to the 2's? Cancel and you're left with pi over 3. Now I need to take pi over 3 and divide that in half, don't I? So I'm going to take pi over 3, and instead of dividing by 2, I'm going to multiply by a half. What's pi over 3 times a half? Pi over 6. Okay, so my buddy Zelly says he knows how to get the third tick mark. You take the first tick mark and multiply by 3. So he gets 3 pi over 6. 3 pi over 6 is the same as pi over 2. True or false? There is a horizontal shift. True, there is. So let's make a ghost graph. This is a cosine graph. Will I start at the max, min, or middle? It wants to be maximum, but because it's negative, it's down at the minimum. Cosine starts at the max or the min. If it's negative, it's the minimum. The last step that I need to take is to shift this. How do I determine how much I shift it? I take this inside piece and what do? 3x plus pi is equal to 0. 3x is equal to negative pi. So x is what? Negative pi over 3. Okay. How much is pi over 3? Is pi over 3 one tick mark? It's 2 tick marks, isn't it? And is it 2 tick marks to the right or 2 tick marks to the left? Zelly? Very good. Yep. So go ahead, Morgan. So pi over 3 is my half mark right here between the 4. So it's 1, 2 tick marks to get to pi over 3. See that? So I'm going to take all these points and move them back 2 tick marks. Very good. Yeah. So Leslie made a great point. In terms of kind of like a double helix. You know, a lot of the things that we see in the natural world can be modeled by sine and cosine functions. It's okay to get confused. We'll work together to get all the confusion. Give it time. It's not, yesterday I told calculus, I said, we have a 3-day lesson we have to get through. And so yesterday they left, they were all completely confused. Today they're feeling a lot better. And tomorrow they'll feel great. And if you're a little bit confused today, don't worry. Tomorrow you feel a little bit better. Work through a couple. Okay. Well, I'm gonna come around and help. You can go ahead and get started.